All right, welcome back. We are MDEV1004. That's Mobile APIs and Frameworks in the summer 2023 semester at Georgian. And it's week 5, part 1 of our broadcast and recording. And this week is kind of a different kind of week than normal. Not a lot of theory, and all practice is what we're going to be doing today, because we have to finish our CRUD application for Express. That's our job. ICE 4 has been released and is due this Sunday, as well as your assignment 1, the first part of assignment 1, which is it's a kind of a 2-part assignment. This says assignment 2 is due week 6, but one thing that I'm going to be doing is moving assignment 2 into the same week as the mid-semester tests, only for time, not because I want you to kill yourself with both things at the same time, but rather just to give you more time to do everything. So that way you can adjust your assignment 2 stuff into that week. Assignment 2 is basically, and assignment 1 are basically one big assignment that I broke down into 2 parts, so you can get things done a little easier. The first part is Express, kind of making an Express API that's read-only, and then now with the next one you're going to do an Express API that's full CRUD and authentication. And there is going to be a part in your mid-semester test that is going to basically be adding on to that. So both are due at the end of week 7, but we'll talk about how we can navigate these 2 things. And maybe I might want to give you some extra time on the mid-semester test. It might span into our mid-semester break, so by the end of the break or something. I don't know, we'll see. It's just because of week 3. Week 3 messed us up because we had that week that we lost. And so, time frames are tight, and I have lots to talk about in this course. And before we get into the second half, which is going to be, in my opinion, differently challenging than this first half. Okay, so last week when we got together, we talked about converting our project to an Express API. We used Postman a little bit for testing, and it helped us. NoSQL databases we talked about, Node.js and Express full CRUD we talked about. Intro to MongoDB and Mongoose. We had a lot of stuff last week, and that was all catch-up stuff from week 3, right? So, and I probably would have spread it out a little bit more and put more into week 3 and less into week 4. And if we had another semester where we didn't have that break, then yes, I would have done that. Reading data from a data source we talked about, and connecting to MongoDB Atlas and Realm. We did all that last week. It was a lot. It was a big week. All right. This week is not going to be as big, I'm hoping. And what I want to try and do is just finish off our full CRUD application, right, which is going to help us with assignment 2, right? And assignment 2, like I said, right now, I'm just going to pen this in, is the shell for assignment 2 has been released. That is going to be due, I'm moving it to week 7, and it's Sunday, June 25th, correct? Let's take a look at that. I don't think the timeline's right, 25th, which is, I guess, Pride weekend for those people that care. And so that is when it's due, along with your mid-semester test. Again, what I'm going to be doing with the mid-semester test is it's going to be something that can be done in 3 hours, not something that takes like all week. Okay, so if anything, it's going to be an add-on onto your assignment 2, which is what I'm going to do. And we're going to build. Everything is building upon one thing and the other thing. And I'm hoping to give you a starter, if I can, for assignment for mid-semester test, or say, hey, if you can use the materials from assignment 2 to start off with, that might be the way to go. So this week, not that much theory, as you can see. It's all practical, and we're going to try and fix up our CRUD API. One thing I do want to do is I want to deploy to render.com, because that's part of your assignment that I want you to do for assignment 2, right? So, and how does render.com talk with MongoDB Atlas? How does that work, right? Because that's going to be tricky. So that's where we're at right now. And I do have somebody in class that I can ask any questions. Are you good?
I'm good.
All right, so there we go. And other than that, we don't have anybody online, and that's just me, with myself. And let's get into where we were last time. So what I've done is I've gone in and I've copied the last week's project from ICE 3. I copied it into ICE 4. That's the first thing I've done as we continue. And I'm going to go into my project settings here, my package.json, and let's change this so it says ICE 4, just for accuracy more than anything else. And we're also going to review what we did last week by running ICE4 and putting this up on GitHub. So I'm just going to do command, control backtick, and I'm going to say git add dot, and git commit -m. We'll say added project files for ICE4, and then git push. So that should be something that's more natural to you. Git add, git commit, git push at this point, and that it pushes everything up to GitHub. All right, so that is that's what's happening there with our package.json is really the only thing we changed. And now what we want to do is we want to test it out by running nodemon. So let's try that out. So remember, nodemon, what we do is we use nodemon for testing, and that's what this does. Remember that we do have a connection right now. I'm not allowing access to this one. We do have a connection to MongoDB, right? Atlas, right? Because if we look at the server from last time, and if we go to config, and if we go to db.ts, we have this connection, which we made last week, right? That's the connection we're going to keep. We're going to kind of pass it over to this one. And inside of our app.ts, right? Again, we're using TypeScript to do all this fine work. Then what we're using is db.remoteURI, and db.remoteURI basically says, hey, we're connecting remotely, right? And this is how we want to kind of continue this week, right, with this kind of thing. So that's what we want. We want to be able to connect to a remote URI, and then we want to be able to do full CRUD today, but we need API endpoints for this kind of stuff. And we also discussed last week, let me just do a transpile. One thing I always do when I'm working with a TypeScript project, again, I want to say this, my friends, is always transpile as soon as possible. So I'm going to go do Control-Shift-B. If you're on the Mac, it's Command-Shift-B, which should bring up your task runner up here at the top. And I'm going to choose my watch task up here. There we go. There's my watch task. And wonderful, that is starting, and it's going to transpile everything. And because we're running nodemon will restart the server. You can see that that's happened already, right? So that's what's happened there. And the way we can test this, of course, is to go into our localhost. Let's do that. And localhost 3000, you can see that that is, we know this is just our test to make sure that Express is running. It doesn't really do anything because if you went to that host, it won't give you anything. But if I type in my endpoint, and this is what this endpoint is, which is movie list, then we get this. And this is the movie list. And I didn't get any questions last week about this, but what this is basically a list of everything that we put up online based on our Excel spreadsheet. We converted it from Excel to CSV, from CSV into JSON format, and we took some time to make sure that genre, writers, directors, and actors were all kind of a list of strings. That's what they were. And that's how this came up to be. So this is what you should have right now. You should be at the point where your API from a read-only perspective is showing this, and you should have your 20 movies, top 20, that is showing here up online for your assignment 1. Okay, that's what it should be. And that's what's due this weekend. This weekend, assignment 1 is due, and this is what I'm really looking for, something like this, but with your movies, not mine. And with also some information about your posters, because I also, eventually, we're going to pull this into Android, and we want Android to be able to kind of, an interface to be able to see, or even iOS, to be able to see your movie. What does it look like? Maybe a short little thumbnail, all that kind of stuff is what we're looking for. Okay, that's awesome. So that's what we did last week, and we can confirm that everything is still working today.
When I have it set to remote,
yeah.
It does not function, and it's not because I think it's because the school blocks it.
Doesn't, because I'm not in school right now.
I had mine working perfectly it works locally, but the remote that I had working at home does not function.
Because, so here's the reason why it would work. So remember, that's a good question. So the question was, hey, it works at home, but it doesn't work here.
Right.
It's the IP address. So if you go to your MongoDB Atlas, right? So So let's try this out here. If I go to MongoDB Atlas, and if I go and I log in, let's log in now together.
Oh, right.
Right?
It's because I have it set so it's, yes.
It's we'll talk about it because I'm sure other people have the exact same problem you have,
Yes.
right? So let's do that. So we're going by Google, I believe. I do Google or GitHub. I can't even know. I don't even know now. And yeah, so here we are. And last time we have this movie cluster, and remember that what we have is a user, right, that we set up, right? So we had network access. So down here in security, right, we have network access. And what I did is I set up an IP address of 000, and when you do that, it allows you access from anywhere. Now, let me mention what this means. It means that I can connect to my database from my API from anywhere, right? And this is good for us because we're testing, but bad from a security perspective. If I was running this from a secure location, and I knew there was only one location, for example, if I ran this from render.com, right, then we would want to change it to the IP address that render.com gives us. So it's only from render.com that you're going to manage stuff, not from anywhere, because otherwise it makes it so that anybody can attack my API and log in and do all that shit, right, which is not what we want. All right, so that is what we have to change. I don't know if you can change that. If you change that to 0000, if you edit it, then you'll see that this includes any address that you want to go from. It should work for you. So check that out, and that's the first change that you want to make for sure. Okay, so before anything else, we want to talk about again, what we have so far. So I always start with what we have. Does it work? Huh?
Yep.
Yeah. So you can see here, you can see that we've got our movie list. There's no changes. The favicon missing because we don't have a favicon, but who cares? And we're going to continue working with this. So we are using the client side only for testing. See, the server's up, right? And really what we want to do is if you want to do anything with our index.html, just for today, first thing I want to do is instead of saying, welcome to Express, we're going to say, our Express API, we should probably put something like Express API, something like, top 10 movies, and yours would be top 20 or whatever, top 10 movies of all time. That's what it's going to say. And we also want to say something like, we want to list the endpoints for the user if we're going to do something like this. So basically something like, if they come here, we're like, hey, this is an API, this is not a website, okay? And you want to try and do some kind of stuff. So we're going to probably do an unordered list that's in here. And if you want to make it look nice, you can certainly use something like Bootstrap and all that stuff. We're not doing that. This is not a thing. But so we're just going to use an UL, and inside an LI, right? A list item. And inside of that, we want an anchor tag, right? Which is where we're going to put in our link to the first thing that we have. So it's going to look like this: UL with an LI with an href, which is going to give us our kind of our list, which is going to be movie list. That's what it's going to be, and we're going to say that here like this: movie list API endpoint. So what this is going to do for us, right, is it's going to basically say, hey, this is an API, right? Here's our movie list API endpoint. That's what this does. So then if I save this is just for the front end. Then if I go back to my local host, and if I just go back, and I don't want to see the actual movie list itself, and I went back to here, it's going to just show me this. Express API, top 10 movies of all time, movie list API endpoint. If you click onto it, it should show you this. So there's a place to go. It's not a full website. It's not meant for that. It's just if someone gets here by accident and they come to the thing, they know that they have an endpoint they can get to and all that stuff. And you can, for testing, this is just an easy way of doing it. Okay, wonderful. What we want to do is we need to put in a couple more. We want to be able to do full CRUD, and full CRUD means we're reading right now, so we've got the R in CRUD. We need creation of new movies, we need updating of movies, and we need deletion of movies. Now this is more challenging. The deletion of the movie thing is the easiest to do, right? But the way it would work is, and for all of these, by the way, guys, if you're watching this video, here are the basics. Let's talk about the basics. One, we need to search for the movie you want to play with, manipulate, right? And that is the first curly braces we're going to use. What movie are we looking for? We're looking for this movie, whatever it is. Second thing is, we're going to do deletion, or we're going to do updating, or we're going to do insertion, or we're going to do whatever, all right? So when it comes to creation, there isn't a movie we're going to create. We're just adding something new, right? Which means we need to instantiate an object of type movie. That's what we need to do. And then we need to save it or update it or whatever, which is what we talked about. And so the next stage of this is taking a look at that Mongoose, kind of the new Mongoose documentation, because things have changed, like we said before. And if you look here under queries, then we wanted to look at stuff that you could do. And so let's start with creating new movies. We'll start with that one. That's a little bit more challenging. But I think if we tackle that one, updating is not as hard, and deleting and updating there's relationships between the two of them. So if I'm thinking about creating a new movie, right? So here are the ones that I can do. I can kind of do these things, right? So I can delete, find by ID, replace one, update many, and update one. And what about if I wanted to insert? How do I do that, right, with the query, right? Because that's something that I want to do, right? I want to be able to add a document. So here's what a document would look like, where we kind of have a new model. It says retreating, updating, updating using queries. We have to validate it, and we want to overwrite, and that's all it says. So maybe it's kind of like a, kind of an insertion is like an update. And if the thing doesn't exist, we make it, kind of thing. This is new because back in the day, remember, if we looked at the MongoDB documentation, if I was going to go to mongodb.com, and if you just look at the commands for MongoDB, so let's say if we go to products, and let's look at, where's the documentation here? One thing that I don't like about the MongoDB website is like they don't have, kind of something that is apparent right at the top. MongoDB, they've changed stuff a lot, which is they're trying to make it so it's better. Here's forms. Where is it? I don't think so, but hey, let's try this out. Here's documentation. Maybe it is here. I don't know. And what we want is MongoDB database manual. That's it. And version 6 is the big one. And we want to do commands. So let's see if we can, is there a search? So queries, data models, index, security, sharding. And I'm going to look it up in a second. But that's, here's CRUD operations, honestly. So I want to do inserting. I want to insert a document, right? So it's insert, query, update, and delete. And I want to do insertion. So if you look at insertion methods, it looks like this, insert one. So that's what I kind of want to do, right? And the way to test this in terms of what we can do, if we didn't know any of this, let's see, does it work on here? So if I went to here, what I want to do is I want to make a brand new endpoint. So the first thing we do with the endpoint is we go to our controller. Here's our controller, and we're going to go to movie TS. And right now we have this. By the way, so we can kind of call this function, the export function itself, right, is display movie list, right? And so what we could do is we could make this function a async function. Okay, we could do that. We're going to come back to that in a second. But for now, all we have is this, which is okay. And we can do it this way, which is the other way of what they recommend, right? So where you make a query, and the query is not a promise, but it looks like a promise. So we can get rid of this for now. It's just, we don't need this part. But so we can make it a little cleaner. And so our first controller logic behind the view is display movie list. We want to make it so we can insert a movie, right? And also maybe we want to only display one movie, a specific one. I'm looking for a movie. So that's like kind of like find one, right? So let's copy this thing and let's do that one first. Let's do like find one. So I want to say like, instead of display movie list, we want to display a specific movie, right? And for this one, we need to be able to pass in the movie we want to display, right? Because we want to do that. And so certainly we have our request, response, and next object. This is what we're going to have. But we're going to also have our request.body.params, right? So the request object itself is the thing that goes to the top of the URL, right? So I put in some stuff, right? And I have a parameter, a bunch of params, like a number that I'm looking for, which is usually separated by some kind of information, right? So if I wanted to find one, and let's just, kind of wipe this away because we don't want to do that for now. Let's just start from scratch and think about using the API as developers. We're going to say, hey, movie, I want to find, and here's the one I want. So find one or find by ID. Well, to me, it makes sense that I might say, and look at these other ones, find by ID and delete, find by ID and update. Well, I like that one for update, right? So find is there. What about if I did something like insert, right? Insert many, it says, but there is no insert function, right? So that tells me right there that anything that I had before with the insert functions are gone. We had insertion functions before and no more. They don't exist anymore. So insert doesn't exist. So then we would probably use something like update. So I probably use something like find and update or just update one. We're going to talk about this.
Could you not just use insert many, but just insert many just one?
Could. It's weird, and it's insert many doesn't seem to be the thing we want to do, right? Because, like I said, something's not right. So let's go back to just find, and we'll do find by ID is what we want to do. So if I did find by ID, then first of all, the first part is the ID that we want to find, right? And then the projection is what they're talking about here. So the ID is what we're looking for. And it kind of gives you down here a little bit of a thing here that basically tells you what it looks like, a little bit of an example. So find by ID with an ID that looks like this, right? Okay, so where the ID is ID. Okay, cool. So that means that what we want to do is we want to say, hey, I want to get the request. I want to say let ID then equal to the request.body.params is what I want to do. And by the way, if I do that, request.params is what I want really. So request.body.params is what it used to be like, and now it's just request.params. Request.params mean the request parameters, and then we want the ID. Now take a look at this. If I said ID of the parameter, right? So the way it works is it's the API endpoint, colon, and then the parameter. That's how we're going to have it, right? That's how normally it works, right? And we're going to test this out with our friend Postman, right? Postman. And so this is the first part we have to do. So then we're going to go down here and say, okay, well, we want to find a movie by ID, and we know that the ID is ID, and we want to look at this. This is what we want to find, right? And that's the first thing. And if you look up here, it says that is kind of the first thing we want to do. Great, let's return that data. So we're going to say here, we're going to say that dot then, we're going to say function. By the way, these functions can be the arrow type functions, right, which we're going to convert to in a second. And then we're going to say res.json, response.json data, and that's if you find the ID, right? Because that's what we want to do, right? Because it says, hey, I want to be able to find, of course I have the extra space there. I want to be able to find that data. That's what I want to be able to do. And that's awesome. But what if I don't find the data, right? Let's go back to this catch for a second, and let's talk about how this will be the same. If I get to here, then that means that I haven't found anything, and not because I haven't found anything, but because, well, there is a problem, some kind of problem with a connection. It could be a problem with, the server. Something happened, right? So that's what this is going to be. This is my little thing. Now we know that what if my ID doesn't exist somehow? So this is going to be something where we need to check to see if the ID exists. Like, for example, I'm looking for a movie and I can't find that movie, right? So what happens with that? I'm going to get the empty set is what I'm going to get back. So where my data is empty somehow, right? So ID doesn't exist somehow. Let's say the ID I get back and it doesn't work. And my data set that I get back before I go to JSON is the empty set. If I get the empty set back, it means the movie's not found, right? And I need to give a response like that, where I say something like, so res.json is interesting because res.json gives me two things. It gives me, I can tell you that there is a 404, right? So I can say if everything is good, I can say res status 200.json, and then pass in some data, right? Or I can say res status 404, right? Data not found, right? Or something like that. That's what I want to be able to do. So this is kind of how I want it, and it gives you some examples of how this works. So first of all, I can say something like res.status, and I can do this for both of them, res.status 200, so status 200. This is what I want to do, right? JSON, everything's good, right? And then res.status 200, that's everything is good, and we found everything. But what if we don't find the data? What if my data is no good? Then we need to find something where it's a 404. If data is empty, right? If the data set doesn't have anything, we're going to search for this and talk about how this might work differently. But first, now we have a new endpoint, right? So a couple things to do, and this is where we want to say find one movie by ID, right? And we want to always talk about how this would work from a roots perspective. So it's how the root would work now. Okay, so we've got the display movie, yay, and then so we want to be able to do that too. So we have our display movie list, right? And then we want to kind of say, comma, dot display movie. And maybe we want to say display movie by ID, right? Display movie by ID, right? So let's change that. So by ID is what we want to put in there. We don't have that function yet, but we will change our controller so that it says display movie by ID. We want to make our endpoint understandable is what we want to do. So display movie by ID, as an example, and we need to pass the ID into the movie, right, that we want to make. So this is what this does, display movie by ID. So now we need a route for that. How is this route going to look, right? So we're going to do a router.get. So router.get, and then here is the special thing we need to do for this route, where we say something like slash movie, right? So the movie, instead of a movie list, we're going to say movie, and then colon, and then we want something like, well, ID. That's what we want, movie ID, right? Where ID is the thing that we want to pass in, right? And then we want to pass a function. Come on. We want to pass a function where request, response, and next. And what we're going to do is we're going to call up our display movie by ID, and we're going to pass in request, response, and next. That's what you want to do, right? And we want to pass this forward. Right, so that's kind of how it works. By the way, here's something that you can try. If we did something like an async function here, which is possible, right, then really what we're saying is async await, right, where I would pass in async await, this kind of thing here, which you can actually do here inside of the router, where you make it an async function, where you're waiting for it away. We're going to come back to this, but this is something that we want to definitely implement in our style of doing things. Why? Because we don't know when. The asynchronous nature of JavaScript says that we don't know when we're going to get back this thing. All right, so save. So now that we've got this is our endpoint. How do you test it? So testing is the main thing. First of all, we need to know the ID, right? We don't know the ID. We know nothing about the ID. So let's bring up Postman. Here's the Postman app again. Actually, let's bring up Postman, like I said, not that one, not Scene Builder, Postman. And what we want to do for testing, because, again, before we put this up on GitHub, is we want to be able to make our new API. So we're going to say, let's go there. And so it's a GET request, and it's going to be say, hey, localhost 3000, right, / right? And what we want to think about is what this thing is going to be. So it's going to be movie, and then something else after this thing that's going to be the thing. Now, is it a hash that we need? How will this look? How will the API endpoint look when it comes to putting in the data? You guys know? Do you remember? Because this is where it's going to be. Is it going to be a question mark? Is it going to be a hashtag? Is it going to be what? Or is it going to be this? Right? So, because remember, there's got to be a link. This would be a link. If I was going to click on a link on another site somewhere, there would have to be something that I'm going to be sending off to this one, right? So, right? So if this, let's say that's the one. So if I say question mark ID equals, well, that's PHP. That's what we do with PHP, isn't it? Yeah, but that may not be what we're looking for here. So I'm going to give you an example of how this might look, and I have another little example here.
I also have a second question.
Yeah.
When you look at the database has, and you use the underscore ID, and that was like the field name from the database, right?
Yeah.
Okay. On my database, it automatically assigned an object ID to the ID, which is a big giant long number.
Yeah.
No one's going to remember that. But also having a movie ID rather than an underscore ID, would that not be a better use for a find? Because then you'd be only finding between number 1 and 20, which makes a lot more sense than using a long number you'll never remember.
Okay. So sorry, say that again. So the long number would be the number that they're going to give us, as opposed to, so we can use movie ID instead of the underscore ID. The problem with that is it really depends on how you set things up. If I'm searching for a movie by title, am I searching by movie ID? I can make a bunch of different endpoints. Search by movie ID, and the more endpoints I make, the more usable my project is, right? So yes, the answer is yes. You're absolutely correct. I like that idea. But first, let's start off with that under crazy thing. You would click onto it, and it would kind of relate to whatever the thing is going to be. So here's an example from another little thing that I made, and I'm just going to show you the controllers for something else. And here I had a contact list instead of a movie, all right? So same thing with TypeScript, and this is the old school way of doing things. But basically what we had was, here's my edit, my display contact list page. This is an actual full API, full site with everything else. And then usually I do something like process edit page or process thing. So there's my rec params ID, the idea here. I'd have to do one of these, right? But how does it look on the routing side, which is what we want? So if I go back to the routing side, and this is always something to look at because we want to see how this would look. So if I was going to make a route for editing, it would look like this: edit : /:ID. Now this is the thing, /:ID. And I didn't do that. So let's fix that. That was a mistake on my end. I knew there was something I was missing. So down here on the root, it would be /:ID, right? Which means we don't even need to put the colon. We just need to put a slash and the ID behind it. That's what's going to be there, right? So let's save. So that's what I was missing. So if I go back to localhost, as an example, it would be something like this. It would be movie, right? And then slash and whatever the ID is going to be. We don't have the ID yet, but let's go back to Postman and do this. So the ID would be, so this is the ID. Now, Postman is interesting because it also allows us to have a body. Take a look. So here's our body, right? And there's different things here. There's form data that we can simulate, right? We have a key, right, which is kind of like the movie ID, right? And that would be the ID that we want. So this is the key. And the value would be something that we want to put in here. And this is the value that we would copy in there, and then it should insert it in here, right? So now we don't know what this is, so let's go back to get it from our database, MongoDB Atlas, for now. This is just the first step in doing this whole thing. So go back to this. I'm going to go back to my database. I'm going to look at my collections, right? And I'm going to look at my movie, and I'm going to literally copy this key right here, right? So the first one. So I'm going to get Alien 20th Century Fox, this one. Copy this one right here. This is the key. And this is an actual good one because it's should return Alien. And I'm going to go back to Postman here, right? And populate that inside the value, and let's see if that works. So here's the way of testing it. If I click send now, we should get back Alien. And it says cannot get movie. This is what we get back, okay? So that didn't work. So ID is what we wanted, right? And it's the params ID that we wanted to. So So again, I'm pointing this out because it says form data, right? And now let's move this away. So let's delete that and come back to this. And let's go to www form URL unencoded and go to that. So let's click on that instead. So click on this and do the same thing. So I put the ID in there, right? And then in here across from that, we're going to just put in this. That's the ID. And let's see if this does anything different. So click send. And then send, again, we get cannot get movie, right? And also, just to talk about how this would work, if you were going to pull, have some kind of link for this, the button for how this would look, right? We can simulate this also on the front end with our API, right? Let's do the API button. So again, we did it here with Postman, and we didn't quite get it. We got a 404 not found, which is okay, right? And on our, if we go back to Visual Studio Code here, so this is our Visual Studio Code, and if I press save, make sure everything's saved, then if I go to Control Backtick, you can see that, look, I've kind of looked for a couple of movies here, and nothing's happening. Huh, okay. Well, let's go back to the link. So the link may be wrong. Maybe we put in the link where we put in the slash, because slash has to be in there, right? So movie slash, and then the ID. Okay, now click send. And again, we get this. We get, cannot find. And down here we see, look, this is the new link, movie slash, right? And then, we have our endpoint. This is our movie ID, which is we're looking for the ID, the request dot param ID, right? And that's what we're looking for. Okay. Well, how would this look if I was going to make a link? So again, going back to that other API, full API example where I had like a thing. I mean, we did it right. This is the NPI endpoint, right? Which is basically, I'm going to put in movie slash ID, and then we want to process the, the show page or whatever. How does that page look? So if we're going to look as an example at some, a view, and I have some views as an example from an old website, and if I go to content view, and let's just say if I was going to go to edit, so how would this edit page look? And I'm just going to look at some, as an example, at some views, or even the list page. Let's go look. Actually, the contact list is kind of like the movie list in some ways. It doesn't really matter. So it would kind of look like this. So we have contact list, movie list, edit, slash, and then some kind of ID. Look at this, an ID, right? That would be here. Where we're looking for the ID, ._ID is what we're looking for. And this is what we're looking for. So this is actually correct, what we did. So slash edit, in this case, slash movie, and then slash ID. Now maybe some other things that we're going to think about when we make our API, should we call it movie or should we call it find? Find this. Here's our movie list, our movie API, find this movie for me, right? So that's something we can think about. But this, what we did was correct, right? So let's make that link work like it should. So what I mean by this is let's make a link like this in our own little test. So back to this. And if I went to index.html, right, where we were kind of making this example here, let's make a little thing. So we're going to say, so li, let's do this, let's use Emmet for this, lia, right? And what we want is slash movie slash the ID that I want. That's what it would look like, right? And that would give us a fair test. So this is find a movie by ID, find a movie by ID, where the ID is whatever the movie is we want. For now, this is the one we're going to test with, right? Save. And if I go back out to localhost 3000, let's go back to localhost 3000 here, then we have nothing. We have to make an href here. This is the link, right, that we want. So movie slash, so why isn't this link working for us? Because we put it in the wrong place. This should be right here. And we'll refresh. There we go. And if I click onto it, we should see the movie. And there it is. So it kind of works. Look, it's there. But how do we test it with Postman? This is the link that we want. You can see clearly this has worked. This is exactly the link that we want here. And I want to put in whatever I want. How do I test it with Postman? What is the thing that we use here? Because if I did this, like I said, movie, right? And we did movie, so localhost 3000. This is the thing we want, localhost 3000. And then slash movie, slash, right? And then we're going to do a get request. That's what we're doing, right? And then here's the body. And then there's something over here that says params. Huh. Okay, so back to this. Go back to params. Here's the key. We'll make this ID. And then if we put in value in here, oh, that's not the value I want. I want the value from the movie, which I'll just steal from this one right now. This is the actual movie. So it kind of works. I'm just, you know, we need a good way of testing it. That's why I'm showing you this with Postman, so that we don't do this. So this is what we want. Now this is, take a look at this. Is this correct? The answer should be no, because look, it gives us a param. It gives us an actual thing. ID, this is what you were saying. ID equals to this. That's not what we want. So params isn't any good, right? Okay. So that's no good. Authorization basically tells us how we want to authorize. We're going to come back to this in a second. There's headers. That's not what we want. And so there's body. So it must be this somehow. So it's, you know, form data is one thing. There's raw, right? There's raw, and where we can actually put in whatever. There's binary, GraphQL, text that we want. There's JavaScript and HTML that we want to put in here as well. So we know that probably something like a URL encoded key is what we want. Something that looks like this, okay? But whenever we send it, we get nothing back. So what is the way to do this? What are your thoughts? Well, it's got to be something, because that's how it's got to work. This is exactly what Postman does for us is, if we don't have a form, right now, and we want to try it out, we're going to need to do this again. Before we get into deleting and adding, we're going to have to do something like this again, right? So think about the body of the movie, right? That's one thing we have to add in. So the key, it's key value pairs that we're checking. So that's what the form URL encoded is. Form data, right, is where we actually have form data that we're putting in. Params is if I have parameters like you thought about, right? And headers is any kind of other headers that we head in. We're not going to do any headers. This is like headers inside the URL. So how do I do this? This is what I want to do, form data. And again, we kind of did this when we said, well, the ID is, it's the ID and the value is whatever, right? That's what we want to put in. And if we send it, again, we get nothing. What if I said there's no ID? So there's no ID, right? And we just have a value. And how does that work? Does that work? And the answer is no, right? So, and it says test results. Let's go to the body itself. And one thing that this does is says 404 not found. And a quick feedback for you guys when it comes to testing is, again, it goes back to this. Take a look at this. You can see that what we sent there when we did our actual URL with a GET request, we sent all of this. But when we are sending this part, we're not sending anything. Take a look at this. We're sending nothing. That's what's happening. That's why we're getting 0. We're getting movie, whatever, right? So it'd be nice if we got something in there, like in the URL, right? That's what we want to do. So, okay. So that's something that's missing. So we got part of it. Part of the URL is up here. Well, we could do this. We could say that, oh, let's put this part here. But that's not what we want to do when it comes to editing. How do I add a movie afterwards? I can't do it this way, right? So sure, that would totally work. If I did this and click send, then you're going to get what we want, right? We want to be able to do this movie up here, and we want to be able to, you know, kind of, to put it down in here, right? So one thing to note is, here's the some settings, right? And you can see that automatically follow redirects is important. These are all things that we can do with Postman. Postman is a very useful tool, but we need to know how to use it. And then the other one is there's form data, there's none. So there's none if I don't want to put any form data at all. Or I can use this, this thing that's encoded. You can see that this is not correct. We're going to undo that one. So then, well, how would this work, right? So it says send, and it says send and download. And there's some options here. We have get, post, patch, delete, update, head, and then there's options. right? So you can send options as well. These are all the types of requests we can make, get, post, whatever. And we're doing a get request because we're not sending anything that is private. Usually if I want to do a post request, it's, normally when I do a post or something like that, I want to make a change to something. You know, I'm modifying the form data. Realistically, we are doing a post request. That's what we're doing. We're doing a post request, right? So that means that if I was to change this to a post, and if I click send, we're going to get nothing. We're going to get, error. Why? Because cannot get this. There is no post link back to this. If you want to make it a post instead of a get in our routes here, we can just change this to router.post. Right? This is how it would be, which is post movie ID. We want to kind of get, if we had to change something, we would get it would still work. Watch. So if I did this, and if I wanted to make it a post type request and I click send, then we're going to get our data again. Yay, right? There's our data. It post, get, put, delete, update, it doesn't really matter. It's just standards. So here's the standard that I'm going to use. If I'm just going to get reading data and make no changes, I'm going to use a get request, right? If I'm going to do some kind of changes where I'm going to post some data, I'm creating something, I'm going to use a post request, right? If I'm going to update, I'm going to use an update request, and if I do a delete, I'm going to do a delete request. Those are all the kind of things that we want to kind of do, right? So yeah, could it work? Yes. Should it work like this? No. And the reason for this is because of the way we did it. Okay, back to this. So we're going to put this back as a get, because that makes sense, because we're getting the ID, movie by ID, which is what this is, right? And we're going to go back here, and we're going to do a get request. And when we do this again, you can see that we get this thing back. But we don't want to put this up here. This is not what we want. We want to be able to do a get request or specific thing by putting in the information up here somehow, right? So how do we do it? You need to help me out. So I want to be able to get a movie by ID or get an item by ID. Let's do a search. So I'm going to do kind of a thing on it. So, and I said, so I want to, how to use Postman to get Postman with form data, right? So if I do this, ChatGPT is going to come up and say some stuff too in a second, but it says to send a post request, select the post request method, click on the body and select form data. If you look at the response body, you will notice the data you have submitted, right? So it says launch Postman, create a new request, click on new button, and so select the method, HTTP method, choose the desired HTTP method, post, put, patch, whatever, and then it says switch to the body tab within the request window, click on the body tab located below the URL field, choose the form data option in the body tab, and it says, and add form parameters, click the add button next to the form data section to add a new key value pair, enter the key parameter and name, its corresponding value, repeat this step for each form parameter you want to include, and send the request. Once you have sent everything, then we're doing it right, right? Would you say we're doing it right? So, I mean, it literally is exactly how we're doing it. And we need to know how to do this because we have issues, right? If we can't do it this way with Postman, we're going to have a problem later on. So, select the post request, and let's see what it says. All types of post requests in Postman, and maybe we'll get some examples. So we'll see how it works. So here's the body. Now look what he says. He said raw, right? And then he put in inside of raw in the body, right? He put in the name and address and all that kind of stuff, right? So definitely we can do it raw, where we want to put in information about that kind of stuff, right? We can certainly do this one. Body, the name, address, and so on can be put in here like this, right? So that is definitely something we can put in there. And then, so here's the form with the address that we wanted. So they definitely give us some things that we can do, right, when it comes to this kind of stuff. All right, so we're going to come back to this. Let's take a short break. When we come back, we'll do this thing, and I'm just going to take a little bit of a bio break. And when we come back, we'll finish this off and see how we can do this. It's the first step, because we can't do any kind of searching. We can't do editing. We can't do deleting. We can't do anything. Because we'll come back.